Thank you, and welcome to the Greg Struss Show. I'm Greg Struss, coming to you almost live and direct here from Cable Television City in the west side of Chicago. And I am grateful that you are joining us tonight for what will hopefully be another entertaining and informative program. You know, I've been thinking a lot about things, I've been thinking about how long I've been doing television shows, and I was talking with Lee. Lee is our access coordinator out here at Cable Television City. I don't know what the point was, but I needed to make a hand gesture. And I was talking about my, a job that I had in radio in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And, we started talking about broadcasting and things that I've done and things that I want to do because, I'd like to be on CBS 2 in Chicago, to be quite frank with you. But in the past, what I would run into when I was younger was that, you don't have news experience or you don't have this kind of experience and you got to go to a smaller market because that's the way everybody does it. And I don't believe it because I've kind of been able to walk into some situations and hit a ball right out of the park. And other times, maybe not. But where I'm at in my life right now, having turned 50 several months ago, I'm just at the point of where, I don't need to take a back seat anymore. I need to do what, I need to take that action, be personally accountable, have the personal responsibility, and put it out there and start making those steps. And it was refreshing because as I was sitting here, talking about some things, it made me hark back to that last experience. I visited Los Angeles shortly after my show, Grand Alley, finished in Michigan. Now, when I was a senior at Grand Valley State University, I transferred in from Columbia College, and I decided that my senior year, I want to start a show again, because I hadn't done a show in like 3 years. So I had a set, everything else, moved into Michigan, basically had to negotiate, every time you try to do something, either at a university or something else, you got to go through so many different people. And Alex Nestorenko, great man. He is the chairman, still, I believe, of the School of Communications at Grand Valley State University. Scott Vanderberg, great man, was in charge of like all the equipment and such. And they basically said, okay, let's do it, because you're not taking no for an answer. So, Scott would say, well, I want to see how many people are going to show up. So I'd have these meetings and these sessions to get people to, come and work on the show. Now, this was created from scratch, and I've not really thought about this. I didn't think about that effort and that passion that I had because it kind of changed as it, grew and came to an end. I learned very valuable lessons. One is when I get into something, I have to have an exit strategy in case something doesn't work out. And more often than not, when we're doing our own thing, there is that big risk of things maybe not working out the way we want to. So we started out in the university with Grand Alley with Gregory Struss. It was a half-hour talk variety show. A lot of variety. We did a lot of music, featured a lot of music. And what was so fascinating about it and the positive energy that we had is that we had people from the news come out from the stations. We had, the top anchors coming out to the university. In between newscasts, they would sneak out and come and do the show and had a great time and they would talk about it. And then we had people coming from Detroit, 3.5 hours. We didn't pay anyone anything. And the people that worked on the show really didn't get paid. They were working for credit. And I never gave myself credit for that. And saying that, Kara Price, who worked with me for 3 years, went on to direct Fox 17 News. Kent Greer went on to do some things. John DeVries went over to Discovery. I think he's still over there. I've lost touch with a lot of my kids, as I used to call them in a very respectful way. But we all worked together. We were in the trenches together through that whole journey, and it's going to make And I've thought about writing a book about that because I think it would be really fascinating. how we took this thing and then all of a sudden shopped to every station. I had no idea. I kind of had an understanding of how television worked, but from the sales aspect and getting something on the air, I hadn't really done that before. When I was 22, I did it in the sense that I went out to a PBS affiliate in Gary, Indiana, WIIN-TV, and we ended up being on the air for all of 7-8 weeks out of a 13-week so-called contract. We were just a little too risque, I guess, for PBS in Gary, Indiana. But Richard Parker, very nice man, he was the general manager, and he said, you know what, I'll give you a chance. And so I would, go to school. I worked at the police department as a dispatcher. I don't even know if I was delivering pizza at that point in time. I was attending classes, and I remember, in this road of broadcasting, just comparing like my experience of getting on WIIN TV and dropping tapes there, and then, getting to know some people that really didn't have a say, but it was interesting what they were saying to me. There was a woman that was in, what do they call it, traffic. So they're in charge of like what used to be like videotape, when things are going to play, et cetera, et cetera. So she starts putting her 2 cents in and evaluating my hard work. And I remember sitting here, I was all at 22, I had my suit and tie on as I always wore when I went and dropped tapes off, playing the part. And I remember her telling me, this isn't a show my kids would watch, and they're your age. And she's like, and you could do this and you could do that. And I want to go to school for film, she said. And I'm like, so have you ever produced a television show? And she said, no. I said, so what makes you think, and I really asked her this at 22 years old, and I said, so what makes you think that you know about how to produce a show? Well, I know what's good, and yours isn't. So I kind of got dissed, but I gave it back to her. And the difference between both of these stories is when it ended at WIIN TV 56 in Gary and Maryville, Indiana, we continued doing shows because we were on like 12 different cable companies or 8 cable companies all around Chicago, and nothing stopped. Nothing stopped me because I needed, we went on because nothing was going to stop us. So fast forward, about 7 years later, when I'm in Michigan, we, got on WWMT in Kalamazoo, Michigan, and I would literally drive 700 miles a week. I am not kidding you. I had a Volkswagen Rabbit diesel, and I got more tickets in that car for speeding than I did any other car. Those cars are dogs, and I don't know, one year I had like 3 or 4 tickets. And so, I was driving out to the studio. We had to leave the university after we went on Channel 3, so we're working out of a cable access studio. The people were very nice, WKTV, Tom Norton, Greg, why can't I think of his name? Greg Lockwood was in charge over there. And nice guys. And they were, GVSU alumni like myself. And I said, Greg, we watch your show, we like you, come on out. Just give us a show without commercials and that's fine. Now the studio wasn't anything to write home about. But I'll tell you what, we produced some good shows out of that studio in the 22 or so that we did on Channel 3. It just got to the point of where it was too much. I just realized that, I'm in over my head here. I can't possibly produce this thing. I was producing it, hosting it, driving here, driving there. And you figure the studio from where I lived in Grand Haven, Michigan was about 30 miles each way. And then the next day I had to go back out. I was out at that studio 3-4 days a week. And I had to go back out, sweeten it, make the tape better, if there was something mistake, because we used to shoot live the tape. And then I would drive another 75 miles to Kalamazoo to drop the tape off. I believe it was on Friday, and then we aired on Saturdays. And I did this, I think, for about 6 months. And by the end of it, I was like I wouldn't say I was out of my mind, but I didn't know where to turn because money was tight, wasn't making a lot of money. Doing good shows, but not really, I didn't feel they were good enough. They weren't the kinds of shows that we produced when we had nothing but time in between shows to produce. And so I think the level of the quality of the show kind of suffered when we went to commercial television, CBS 3 in Kalamazoo. And I have to admit, I was in over my head. But at the time, I didn't really think I was in over my head. And so we were We went off for a month at the end of January because CBS, the network, was carrying the Olympics, so they had our time slot on Saturday. I wasn't real happy about that, but I really couldn't negotiate. I wasn't in a negotiating position. So we figured that we'd come back in March. Well, about a week before we were to come back, I realized that, you know what? I'm short on sponsors, I'm short on money, I'm short on patience, and I'm exhausted. I don't know what to do. So I remember one of the saddest days of my life, coming to grips with the fact that I had to leave it because it just became too much. And I don't know if that was really the right thing to do, because I felt, at the time I felt that I took this as far as I could. Everything was about producing it for that station, for a station, because that legitimized the show and said, you know what, it's good enough to be on commercial television. And sponsors are paying to advertise on your show. But the secret is that if you don't have a station behind you with promotion and everything else, that's what makes shows popular. Now we have the internet and everything else, you don't even really need a network. But what changed is that I quit. I stopped. I didn't go back to doing shows on cable access again because, I want to be on commercial television. We want to be legitimized, and all of this effort was to get us on the air someplace. And I think if I had to do it, between the two situations of when we were on, Channel 56 in Indiana, I'm 22 years old, and it didn't work out, we still did the show every week and continued to do the show for several years after. And then when I ended that, it was interesting because we started in high school in 3 years, and I went to cable and was there for 5.5 years. We aired on Channel 66 one night. And it was really funny because at that time, Channel 66 was not a Spanish station, WGBO TV, and they had just started pushing and promoting Gunsmoke. Gunsmoke reruns were the big thing for Channel 66. And we ended up getting George Lay, who was the program director, to come down and direct a show. He was so excited that he aired it. And he says, I'm going to put it on in between paid programming, which was all the TNA 900 numbers back then. So we had a 900 number infomercial before us, and we went on at midnight. And I still have this TV guide that says Greg Struss, Channel 66, in my paperwork and stuff. And that was exciting. Okay, so it's the past. It shows that I did it. And you know what? It isn't until now that I realized that, maybe I don't have that news experience, but I got a whole lot of life experience in producing a television show when television was television. And I worked very hard, and I took things very personal. And when it didn't work out, I was devastated. And that loss hit me hard for years and years and years and years after. Because then I had to recreate myself. I had to do something else, and I got away from what I wanted to do. So in a way, I caved into other people's expectations. I ended up leaving Michigan, moved to Seattle, Washington. A couple of my buddies moved out there. Had some personal things that I wanted to accomplish in that move, and got further away from what I wanted to do. So I started up another show out there. And it was interesting. We did about 39 episodes in about 3 years, plus we did a lot of vignettes and things like that. And here I am. I'm 50 now, 35 years, nearly 35 years after my very first television show, and I'm talking about becoming a professional. And I don't know what to do. Like that fear comes of, I don't know what to do. I don't know where to turn. So what I've decided to do is to start reaching out to some of those people who helped me along the way, who I've lost contact with. And they were people that, and really, the people that advised me, many of them passed away. One of the most important people in my life passed away. And he passed away when I lived in Seattle. And that devastated. I mean, when I talk about devastation, it sounds like such a term like, oh, I was so devastated. I was emotionally devastated when that show ended, to the point of where it took me years of second-guessing myself and years of hiding that pain and anguish behind a drink, and how that drink took me over because of the shame and embarrassment I felt. And all of a sudden, one day, here I am, I'm back in Illinois after having left California a very short period of time for a relationship and sold cars at BMW of Beverly Hills, California. I did okay, but that's not what I went to school for. Everybody wanted my personality and my, outlandish sense of humor at times, but I kind of went into a shell after it was over because I was devastated. And, you start turning to the drink and staying out late and working a job that, is less than a skill level, being underemployed and kind of settling for that. And for what? Because I felt I was washed up. And really, just because it didn't work out there doesn't mean that it wasn't going to work out anywhere else. So the other part comes in. The show ended in Michigan. I ended up going to New York. Then I went to California. I got in on the Daily Show, handed a portfolio to somebody that ended up writing the book, Growing Up Brady. And he must have thought I was nuts. And I had a close friend at the time who I grew up with, who introduced me to some people at MTV. But I was too old at 30 for them to be interested. And to be honest with you, I don't think I really had the wherewithal and the emotional strength at that point in time to really realize how I was feeling, how devastated I was feeling about this loss of this show that I had spent so much of myself on and, put all of my reputation on the line. And, this is going to be what it is. But this really wasn't about me being a star, so to speak. It wasn't about me being a multimillionaire. It wasn't about me being important and people saying, oh, well, you're on TV. It was never about that for me, believe it or not. And I had people that worked with me for years that worked with me. My first group of guys, our first group of guys, and that's something I learned in radio TV with Dr. John Malloy. It's not my show. Johnny Carson that was his show, okay? But our show was our show. We were a team. Television is a team sport. And even though the guy or the gal that's in front of the camera is the so-called star, if you don't have those people behind the camera and you don't have that positive energy boosting you up, you really don't have anything. And I said goodbye to all those relationships. That's what happened when it came to an end. I knew 60 people that I talked to a week, and I'm not bragging about this, between the radio stations and sponsors and people that worked on the show. I can't believe what I did. One person, but nobody was going to hold me back. Nobody. And it wasn't about having to prove people wrong. It was because I wanted to do it. I wanted to be on TV because that's what I like. It's what I enjoy. It's what brought me happiness. It's just really hard to explain. Some people, it's all about them. I never really felt it was all about me and, the big ego. And so once again, here I am. And I'm back to the basics. And I don't have a big crew right now. And I've been enjoying this. This is kind of therapy for me as I talk about this life journey. And so as we talked about the end of the show in Michigan and what that meant to me, here I am, the summer going into the fall of that year and wondering okay, what am I going to be doing? Because the call of the big market, that's the other thing. So I get on Channel 3, the CBS station, and at that time I still had some friends that I talked to in Chicago, and they call and they say, congratulations, what are you doing to get out of Kalamazoo, Michigan? And I'm like, I'm thinking to myself, do you realize the undertaking that I just did? We just got on a commercial station. We're the only show of this type that airs opposite of Saturday Night Live. Yeah, but it's Kalamazoo, Michigan. Kalamazoo and Grand Rapids, Michigan is a respectable market, I think. Anywhere where there's a television station is a respectable market. It's not like it was, the 135th market. It was like 37, 39. I mean, that's a middle market. And, to be able to do your own thing, we didn't have network people coming down and saying, you need to appeal to this demo, you need to do this, you need to do that. Maybe it would have helped if we had that. But to do a homegrown show with homegrown people on a homegrown station in a homegrown town, that was a big deal for me. And that's why I moved. I moved because I wanted to be when I say a bigger fish in a smaller pond, in Chicago, it's huge. There's big time names here. In Grand Rapids, there's big time names, but there's room for people. And you know what I learned? There's room for me anywhere I go. And I got to believe that. So here we are. Okay, so here I am doing the show. We just get on, and then I'm hearing that. And it was almost like, what's the message? Like, it's not good enough to be on a CBS station in Kalamazoo, Michigan, Grand Rapids, Michigan? Well, it's not Chicago. No, it's not Chicago, but it was a start. So I was running into that. And then running into oh my gosh, I got to book the show. Oh my gosh, I got to get the crew out there. Oh my gosh, I got to edit today. And it was crazy. Hosts don't do all that stuff. Executive producers don't do all those things. But that was the drive and the ambition. And again, I don't know. Was it an addiction? I don't think so. I'm not in denial about it. But I know that when it ended, how I was affected for about 10, 11 years. And probably on some levels, I still am. And I don't want to say that I'm embarrassed about it. Yeah, I've moved on. I'm doing different things. But you know what? I'm underemployed, and I've settled for less. So I need to read Megyn Kelly's book, Settle for More. So the show ended, and here I am, wondering what I'm going to do. I'm in California, and I didn't like it. And so I started calling stations in Grand Rapids again. And I got hold of someone at there was a guy that left the NBC station, and I became the news director over at the Fox station, was just starting up a news show, and the answer was no, because I don't know if you're going to work, I don't know what. And I'm thinking to myself, don't know if I'm going to work. That's all I do is work. And again, I didn't fit that mold of being in the news. And I don't know. I don't think most of the people that are on newscasts right now are true journalists, but that's just my opinion. And I could have done great work for them. It wasn't the right time, wasn't the right place, and definitely not the right person. So then I called the radio station because I was feeling desperate in the sense that I don't want to move away from Michigan. I like where I live. And what's wrong with being in a smaller area, so to speak? Maybe it's not New York, maybe it's not Los Angeles. And so I had that going on, that thinking that, well, when the show ended in Grand Rapids, I'll go to LA or New York. It doesn't work like that. And people told me it doesn't work like that. So I made a cold call to a program director at Wood Radio, the great Steve Dirksen, who was, I think he really had his fill. He had been in radio for years, was working for Clear Channel at the time, and they just dropped all the regulations, so there were 6 stations under one roof. I walked into that meeting with him, had a great conversation. He says, Greg, I'm going to be honest with you. It doesn't pay a lot. I'm sure you can fill in. You can get into these other stations if you want. But this is what I can pay you, and you can start Sunday if you want. I didn't have a tape or anything, and I went on, and you should have seen the looks on the people's faces that were there forever. My second week in, I'm, hosting the morning show when the guys were off, the Breakfast Club. Andy Rent, great guy. I loved him. He was like one of my favorite people, and I'm thinking to myself, and I never had him on the show, by the way. And I think Andy's at the River now, but he was on Wood FM for a long time at the Breakfast Club, and I'm thinking of his partner, Dennis. And here I am, working Sunday afternoons, that's it. Went in for the 4-hour shift. I was always early, always left late. And then I started filling in for vacationing people, and here's all these other part-time people that have been there forever just looking at me like, you haven't worked in radio for 20 years? How did you get to do this? I don't know. I really believe that 95% is showing up. And if you have a little bit of ambition, right? A little bit of ambition and are excited, that it rubs off on people. But you should have seen the people that just looked at me like, well, how did he get here? It's initiative. And you know what? So that day I got trained by who would later become the program director. And he pretended he didn't know me. He pretended, when you meet somebody and they know you, but they pretend that they don't know you. I didn't know that he didn't know who I was. But he's quizzing me, and the questions of, well, where did you go to school? I said, well, I went to Grand Valley State University. I said, but I originally came from Columbia College. And he's like, well, I don't put a lot of stock in Columbia College. And how dare you? The school doesn't make the person makes the education. You can have an education, but the school doesn't make the education. I make the education because I finished, right? And I went to a great school, and it was a good experience. But this guy sat there, pretended that he didn't know me, okay? Now, I'll tell you the story. So he's asking me, well, I don't put a lot of stock in Columbia College people. And I said, I'll be honest with you, Rob. I said, I'll be honest with you. Sometimes things are overrated, but I said, I thought it was great. Because what was great about Columbia College Chicago as an alumni is that Joan Esposito taught a class. Joan Esposito was on Channel 7 for years, and she was on Channel 5 for years, and she was a primary anchor forever. And a lovely lady. She taught classes, and there were producers from sound places teaching radio. There were news people teaching journalism classes, and then you got to go to a place. I was like a kid in a candy land. One of my producer teachers taught. Produced a show for the rabbis in Chicago. And where did she go? WMAQ. And who was doing the news that day? But Joan Esposito and Bob Surratt. So I'm watching in the control room. I'm like, wow. But that's that's the passion. So here we are. I'm learning learning how they do things at this radio station. And this guy is questioning my education and everything else. And well, I don't put a lot of stock in Grand Valley, or I don't put a lot of stock in Columbia College. And I taught, John Williams over at over at WGN. I've taught him everything he knows, one of those guys. And so I'm saying, well, where did you go to school? Well, I went to Grand Rapids High School. I said, so, me being the way I am, I'm like, so you don't have a college education? I said, but that's okay. Well, how dare you rip on me? So months later, this guy is now the program director. And he starts memoing me shortly after a meeting with the general manager because a group of people were taking fecal matter and, in the bathroom and rubbing it all over the walls, so he wanted to talk to everybody. I let him know that I had a show on Channel 3 at one time and da-da-da-da-da. And so he's like, you had a show on CBS here? I said, yeah, for a very short period of time. And really? And so now this other guy, who was my boss, who's sitting in on this meeting, said, oh yeah, and he had Rick Darl and Scott on, who were like the #1 radio people in Grand Rapids, and yeah, he had that show for a while and everything else, and I'm thinking to myself, oh, so you do know who I am. And he's pretending that he doesn't. So it was funny that when the general manager said, we gotta find this guy something. He's working part-time, we gotta get him something here. And so from that moment on, I started getting memos left and right about everything I was doing wrong. And then I finally just started messing with the guy and saying, okay, for every one thing I'm doing wrong, can you come up with something that I'm doing right? As a matter of fact, why don't you come up with 5 things that I'm doing right? Oh, we're just not at that point because, you haven't done this a long time. So kind of minimizing my experience and such. And I just thought that was kind of crummy. So the day came that it was time to move on. I sensed that they were going to let me go because they were automating shifts. And I think people were threatened. And I don't know why, because I went to work. And I think I was professional. And some people just were like, you never did this before? And yeah, but I did it at a different level. All right, radio's a lot different than doing TV. TV's a lot more effort. And it's not to underestimate these people that have been doing radio forever, They're great at what they do. And I enjoyed it, but radio was never my first choice. I'd love to do a talk show on radio, but maybe that'll be next. So anyway, the point in all of this is that I am now at the point of where, I have to take some pleasure in this and knowing where I came from and realizing that I've done this before. So I thank you for letting me share that with you. You can reach us at The Greg Struss Show at gstrussman@gmail.com. And I love hearing from you. And I hope that you got something from this story today. I don't know if there's really the ending, but there's the opening of where I can go next. And it's really up to me to make that step. I have the ability to communicate, I have the ability to pick up a phone, and I have the ability to return to the basics. And I think that's what's important for all of us when we go through different changes and setbacks. Maybe go back to the basics of what brought me here, what excited me to bring me to this level.